From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer. As the global population ages, the number of people living with dementia is skyrocketing. This affects not only those who are diagnosed, but also their families, caregivers, and the medical system that is struggling to help them. By the end of 2024, 650,000 Canadians will be living with dementia. By 2050, that number will jump to 1.6 million. Now, we've known this was happening for many years, and we've also known what has to be done, but are we even close to being prepared? Dr. Sinha, let's start with you.
This is a challenge that we're all facing, and partly because we're an aging population. So we know that there's going to be more people as we age who are living with dementia, but the key message is that this is not an inevitability, right? There's a lot of things we can do to reduce our risk. There are things we can do to prevent dementia. And more importantly, for those people who are living with dementia and their caregivers, there's lots of things we can do to make their journeys more comfortable and more dignified as well. So there's a lot that we need to do, but we need to get on it.
Dr. Eng, why haven't we? I mean, I remember going back at least a decade, all these very dire reports. Tsunami was the kind of word that was used. Why are we behind on this?
I think aging itself is something that as a society we don't talk a lot about, but yet everybody ages and everyone gets older. And I think in particular as it relates to dementia, it's seen as a normal thing, something that happens to everyone, but not necessarily so. And in addition, there's a lot of stigma and discrimination and shame associated with being diagnosed with dementia. And so I think bringing that awareness out to the general population and caregivers and having them understand the trajectory and what it really means is essential for accepting this.
Now, there was recently a landmark study on dementia in Canada, and the two big takeaways was that women are getting dementia at double the rate that men are, twice as many cases, and also that going forward, 1 in 4 dementia cases will be people of Asian and South Asian descent. So do we know why women are getting this more often?
Women live longer, and therefore it's correlated with age. Women are caregivers. Family caregivers are at 600% increased risk of developing dementia themselves.
Wow.
And it's like and women are in the workforce, in the healthcare workforce. I don't think that's the only reason. I would assume, and maybe you can talk about it, if there's some genetic predisposition or reasons why women are more likely to develop dementia.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is that there's so much we do know and there's a lot that we don't know. So in terms of looking at kind of these disparities that we have, we know that for those in our society, for example, who don't have access to, just the socioeconomic divide that we have means that there's different opportunities, there's different kind of levels of health and wellness. And so there's a number of different things. We know that there's a genetic component, especially for younger onset dementias, but as we age, there's a whole bunch of collective factors that we'll be living through and a lot more research that needs to be done to understand why do we have these gender gaps and why do we have these cultural gaps too.
Is estrogen a factor?
Again, lots of theories, around that. But again, as Adriana was saying, we just don't necessarily have all those answers. But what we do know is that, again, you just started with the numbers of what we expect to see. And there are things that we can try and do to better prevent, but also better support people living with dementia.
And Ngozi, in addition to being a caregiver, you deal with diversity and inclusion. And what we've seen in this report is that a very large percentage of dementia patients are not Caucasian.
Yeah, and so when it comes to women and when it comes to diversity in dementia, that also hasn't been prioritized in the dementia research space in Canada. The United States and the UK, they have a lot more research and a lot more programming, but in Canada, we've yet to get there. But I will say what the research has shown is that racialized groups are disproportionately affected by dementia and typically by the social determinants of health. So things like lack of stable income, lack of stable employment, housing insecurity, discrimination, in fact. So there have been some studies that have shown that discrimination, forms of racism, social exclusion actually ages the brain and actually shrinks the brain in some populations. When we talk about women, absolutely, I mean, everything is still, suspect. But with women, actually, my dad's geriatrician told me this, women, because of our hormonal changes as we get older, perimenopause and menopause, that kind of brain fog you feel, as women, we get older, we kind of forget things. She said that could be an indication of just hormonal fluctuations, but it could be something more. And it could go away as you sort of go out of menopause, or it could not go away. So it's things that, there are some social factors and also some biological factors when it comes to that. Risk factor-wise, when we talk about comorbidities, South Asian, Black, Indigenous, some East Asian populations as well have higher levels of heart disease, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, hypertension. Those are significant risk factors for dementia as well.
The key is dementia is really challenges your memory and thinking that interfere with your ability to do your day-to-day tasks. But there's so many different things that can cause that. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but if people have Parkinson's disease, that can sometimes lead to dementia. If you have vascular health issues, what Ngozi was talking about, if you have heart problems and cardiovascular problems, that can affect your brain as well. In fact, we say there's almost like 100 different types of dementia out there. And so often when I see a patient, it's about making sure, do they have dementia or not? And then sometimes it's those underlying causes can be helpful in terms of how you're going to further treat
So
dementia.
like Lewy body dementia, what's that exactly?
That's another form of dementia out there. And again, all these are caused by different kind of factors that are happening in the brain. So if people have had traumatic brain injuries, that can cause, concussions. These things can cause injuries to the brain. Alzheimer's, we talk about those plaques and tangles, those proteins that build up. And Lewy body dementia, we talk about the formation of certain plaques and what happens in the brain there. So all different kind of biological or other factors that can just impact our brain in different ways.
Do you find that you have to care for people with different types of dementia differently?
Yes, I have a dementia, senile dementia, right, and the Alzheimer's. It's a little bit different, right? I think it's tough for the families to understand, to accept that the person that they love is losing completely their mind. They forgot things, right? One moment is, she's my wife, hi, and then the next minute is, who are you? What are you doing? And they think it's a game. As a caregiver, I used to work for the Canadian Red Cross, great identity, where we used to go and they used to train us and train the clients. Right now, I also work for agency. At this moment, the agencies, I guess because COVID, they don't go to their houses. They're supposed to do assessments and talk to the people, to the families, to make sure they have a social worker, somebody to guide them.
Okay, when we come back, we will look at what all of this means for caregiving.
You're sad a lot for your loved one. But I always tried to put myself in his shoes. And I tried to focus on my love for him after 40 years. We were best friends. We were soulmates. We were confidants. And I don't have any of that anymore. There's a time when you go from being a spouse that you think of yourself more as a caregiver than you do as a spouse.
Well, that was Barbara Tarrant, who is caring for her husband. And unpaid caregivers are the backbone of dementia care. They are family members, neighbors, and friends, and they put in more hours and experience higher levels of distress than those who are providing care for seniors who do not have dementia. There are daycare programs, respite relief, and other community resources, but it's never enough. So what can we do to help them? And joining us now remotely is Zoey Martinovic, who lives with and cares for his 95-year-old grandmother. Hi, Zoey.
Hey, how are you doing?
We're doing fine. So what made you decide to move in with your grandmother, and how is it going?
It's going as good as it can be. It could be better, it could be worse, I guess. It was sort of just a whim. I always felt like my grandmother was an amazing person who lived her whole life for her family and didn't really ever entertain any of her own personal interests. I feel like I'm providing her a bit of dignity in these sort of waning years of her life that I feel she deserves.
And what stage is she at? Do you know her? How much of your time do you have to spend taking care of her?
I'm here 24 hours a day. When I first moved in, I could leave the house for a half day or even a whole day. And now I'm not as comfortable doing that based on a couple different things. More so just her becoming more frail and having more issues with balance and mobility. I don't have much of a life other than this right now.
And Ngozi, I was surprised you're here with an open cell phone because your dad is in the end stages of his disease and something might happen at any time.
Yeah, but when you're caring for someone with dementia, it sort of becomes, I always say you operate and you live life in spite of it, right? Because it is all consuming. It's like always going on in the back of your mind, sort of like a tape playing in the back of your mind. And it changes, like the symptoms and the condition can change kind of overnight, especially at this stage of dementia. So for me, it's very important that I'm accessible at all times. So if I'm doing an interview or something and I get a call, you have to attend to what you have to attend to. Yeah.
But, I've talked to people who basically can't leave the room.
Yeah, and it depends. So within my family, it's taken many years to get there. One thing about caregiving, they don't really talk about family dynamics. They focus a lot on the individual providing care, but from a cultural diversity perspective, a lot of cultures, family care is the whole family. So it's not just the spouse, it's the children, aunts, uncles, everything. So with my family, we've gotten to a point where we sort of go in shifts type of thing. But because you have a designated primary caregiver, makes all the decisions and medical issues and financial issues, that person is on call all the time. That is myself. So, even late at night at 2 a.m., 5 a.m., if I get a call, I get a call.
What have you found in terms of family caregivers and burnout? Literally, I remember one very wrenching interview with a man who said that his wife literally started screaming like a baby when he tried to leave the room.
I think we have to understand, going back to the discussion, there's different types of dementias, and people can live with a dementia over 20 years. And there's different stages of the journey. And so it's very difficult to generalize. And I look at it as kind of a bit of a roller coaster throughout the years with different implications based on what's happening at this moment. Dementia is like saying you have a headache. And when you have a headache, the cause could be a fever, stress, brain tumor. With dementia, there's different causes. So Alzheimer's is the most common, but there's Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia. And sometimes depending on the dementia, how it manifests itself is different for the caregiver. So for some of them where the frontal temporal lobes are affected, there's more personality changes. People are very disinhibited.
Dr. Ng, at what stage do people come to Yihong? What stage are they at generally?
So at Yihong, all stages actually. They may not even know they have dementia. And in the Asian population, what happens is a very strong filial piety whereby you want to take care of your parent or loved one, and to the point where you think that maybe you're not taking care of them well enough and they're being forgetful or, things are happening. And so it's really about early awareness and bringing your loved one to a physician who can assess for early onset dementia. Asians and others from diverse populations do have a tendency to revert back to their first language. And so for those who do not have English as their first language, they do require, caregivers or supports that are familiar to them and provide a sense of comfort. Food, language, games, entertainment, all the things that we enjoy. But those things really support the person to feel less isolated, to feel more healthy and well, and enjoy a higher quality of life.
Just final question, Zoey, do you have anybody who spells you off?
My father does. I would say once a month, he comes here for a weekend, and I still have an apartment in Toronto, and but I'll go visit friends or whatever, something along those lines.
And is that enough for you?
I definitely would like to go on some sort of vacation, but it hasn't really been possible at this point.
Is there good support for caregivers?
I mean, at Baycrest, we have quite a package of different resources. But again, I think one message is each caregiver's experience is unique. And although there's commonalities, there are a lot of differences. And it's not helpful sometimes to say, what could they benefit from? It's more, what could this person benefit from at this point today or this month, given what they're going through and what the person they're caring for is going through. Because, Zoey, I imagine that now you can't go on vacations, but maybe when you first moved in, you could have. Things have progressed that now you can't leave your grandmother alone.
The week that I did go on a vacation, my grandmother happened to have a fall right in the middle of it. So it kind of ruined the relaxation part of it because she had to go to the hospital. And that's a whole other issue because my grandmother is an extremely prideful woman. One of her biggest issues, or our issues, whatever you want to call it, has been just her accepting help in regards to, any type of medicine, bathing. We get 10 hours a week from the government covered a caregiver, but she very often will refuse most things.
Okay, when we come back, we'll look at the risk factors. Welcome back. The numbers are staggering, and getting older is the biggest risk factor. Some people are genetically predisposed, but what action can we take to prevent dementia, and what can be done to slow down the progression of the disease? So we know age is a risk factor, and we've touched on some of the other ones.
As we get older, we tend to get a little bit more sedentary. We tend to get our bones certainly ache more. I went to a friend's party last year, and he said, let's dance like we were in our 20s, and I can't do that anymore. But when you talk about mobility, being able to keep on moving and being able to keep on exercising is very, very helpful and beneficial for the brain. Reducing things like alcohol, smoking, sort of healthy aging is healthy living, right? Another thing my dad's geriatrician said was, social isolation is really, really not good for people who are older. When we're younger, she said that our brains sort of develop by reading. But as we're older, our brains do well with conversing, having social interactions continuously. But we know that older adults tend to be a bit more isolated. So it's looking at ways to make sure that your people are interacting with each other, having those sort of meetings and interactions and engagements. I think for me, those are kind of the top ones in my head, at top of mind.
I gather that obesity, which is exploding around the world, is a big risk factor.
Yeah, so all these things, when we talk about exercise, when we talk about, keeping the brain healthy, we often talk a lot, we talk about Alzheimer's dementia, but then the second biggest form of dementia is vascular dementia. So when we think about things that cause strokes and heart attacks, so things like diabetes, which is more common in say, South Asian populations, or heart disease, these sorts of problems can then lead to those vascular risk factors. That's why we talk about making sure your blood pressure is under good control, making sure that your cholesterol is under good control, making sure that you're getting good exercise and those sorts of things. Because the one good news in all of this is as we become better at managing those vascular risk factors, we've been seeing less of those forms of dementia, or we've been seeing a less number of people living with those because we're better at identifying and managing those. So we look at those things, but also think about hearing, think about vision, because when you're not managing those senses that actually give input to your brain, that actually creates an increased risk factor for dementia as well.
Well, it's interesting. I've seen statistics that people wait an average of 10 years to deal with their hearing loss. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, and this is what I was speaking to earlier, is that people wait until they almost have no choice, where they cannot be home alone. And it's really getting that early diagnosis so that you can retain your assets. So at EHON, we talk about a strengths-based approach. It's not, we want to slow the decline in as far as possible and get in. And even if you don't know, it's fine to get an assessment. It's all right to get one. And so really encouraging people to bring their loved ones or themselves to the doctor and getting that cognitive assessment as early as possible, because then you can really do as much as you can to retain what you have.
Adriana, in your work, do you help people to stay on track with healthy eating, with exercise, things like that?
Of course, yes. Special memory games. Yeah, I'm engaged with my clients and talking to them. The problem is that, again, the family needs to accept the disease, the sickness, right? And get everybody involved. Our seniors has been rejected, has been isolated. The family members put in the senior home and they forget about them. So we, the PSWs, we become the families.
Zoey, you were talking about your grandmother doesn't want a lot of help, but is she willing to eat healthy, things like that?
I think that's one of her sort of saving graces. She has a great appetite. But just touching upon also some other stuff that you guys were talking about, like my grandmother, I'm pretty sure had a stroke in her mid-70s. Has hearing issues and wears a hearing aid. And after her husband passed away about 10 years ago, she didn't want to see anyone, and she didn't want to come to any family events or have she typically would have hosted in our family, like sort of a Christmas, a bunch of different things like that. And she stopped wanting to do all of that for about, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so. And still doesn't, obviously, now, but it's just interesting to hear all of that, because it's definitely correlates to my grandmother, I believe.
Absolutely.
But she eats great. My grandmother really has a great appetite, and was an amazing cook prior to this. So it's interesting. She's very critical of me sometimes.
And I guess people with dementia respond very well to music. Mm-hmm. One of the things that people worried about when they're still in their homes is the stove. What's going to happen when they use the stove?
Music is a way of engaging with people and keeping our brains stimulated. But through music, we interact with others. I just want to. Baycrest had just done through a grant from the federal government a series of podcasts on dementia prevention. They're excellent, and I'm not just saying it because it's Baycrest. I've been listening to them. They're about 30 minutes on each factor that kind of could promote dementia or could make dementia worse, and preventable factors. And so there's one session on sleep, one on social engagement, one on diet, one on exercise, one on caregiving. You can look them up in wherever you listen to podcasts. It's great. It's Jay Ingram is hosting it, and it's really well done. So I highly recommend it for those that are interested. In terms of the stove and safety issues, that's a whole other issue around safety in the home. And there are a lot more technologies now to support that, but at the end of the day, it's a worry. It's a big worry for families.
Yeah. When we come back, what are the options for treatment? Welcome back. Despite decades of research, there's no cure, and the treatments that are available are only moderately effective. But what are the advancements, and how do they help slow the progression of these diseases?
Well, as you said, right now, unfortunately, we don't have any known cures for dementia. We know there are many things we can do to prevent dementia and reduce the risk, but the current medications that we have available in Canada today, they don't even slow the progression. Sometimes people hear that. What they might do is help with some of the symptoms. They might help someone concentrate a little bit better, maybe think a bit more clearly, but they don't change the underlying factors. There's some new infusion medications you're alluding to. Again, not yet approved in Canada, but even with those medications, they're not seen as being blockbuster medications. And we have to be really careful with the language we use, because sometimes we unnecessarily raise hope that might not be as clear. There's some promise around these medications that they might be able to slow some of the progression, but we don't even know if they'd be clinically significant. So that they would make a meaningful difference for Zoey and other people, but we're hoping that with advancements in research, we're gonna get there. But right now, it's about early diagnosis and making sure that we help people get the supports they need, and their caregivers the supports they need as well.
I think you're right about the hype, but this new drug, I know that it was tested here. I forget the name of it, and it was said to slow progression, but you had to administer it very early in the disease.
Yeah. So again, this infusion medication. One of the challenges is that one would have to go for infusions literally every 2 weeks. On a regular basis. You have to get regular MRIs done because there's also a risk of brain bleeds as well. So these aren't medications without their risks. But again, and while the headlines that come out from the drug companies say it slows progression by 40% or can do this, the key is that when we actually look at all the data, we say at the end of the day, does this make a difference for that individual? Does it make a difference for that caregiver? And right now we need a little bit more data to say if it really makes the meaningful difference that matters to people living with dementia right now.
As a caregiver, what did you find in terms of treatment for your dad?
He was on a treatment that was supposed to Aricept. That's the treatment that's supposed to slow down the progression. And I want to say it did, but I can't say for sure because we didn't do tests, right, to see like how effective it was, at which stage, et cetera. I did find, again, the lifestyle changes, that was more accessible for him to slow down the progression of the disease. And so, we tapped into the Alzheimer's Society of Peel, actually where we live, really early. So we got the early diagnosis. As soon as I saw symptoms, we went to the doctor, got him connected. And getting the right supports from the Alzheimer's Society was really, really beneficial for him, to getting that social engagement, to getting counselors, PSWs for the family, and support groups for us, the caregivers. And I think as you're talking about these drugs sort of coming to, I want to say market, but coming to bear for the Canadian population, I think we should be very careful about resting on the blockbuster drugs to come out, and let's take that up. When we really have all this other research that has said, doing things like, exercising, having things that are culturally appropriate, a sense of calmness, a sense of belonging, actually does a lot of wonders for people living with dementia and their care partners and the community itself. So I think while we're getting the drugs, I want to say ready or tested, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater type of thing.
What are you finding in terms of treatment? Do people expect more than what is available?
we would all love to, take that magic pill, but at the same time, what are we wrapping around the person in terms of supports and care and environment? And I think awareness, to me, is I don't know if it's a treatment, but awareness, education, acceptance we talked about. And so right now we have developed, with funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada, an online dementia hub for Chinese Canadians all across Canada. And I believe we need it for all populations, all different populations. That's the first step, I think, that will, hopefully while we're waiting for these blockbuster medications. But in the meantime, what can people do? How can they have a high quality of life?
And Ngozi mentioned getting an early diagnosis, but that's quite the feat, isn't it? I mean, my understanding that it's a long time till people get an actual diagnosis.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Because the challenge is, even for some of these new medications that are being tested, they want you to be getting on these medications before you have a formal diagnosis or super early on. But the challenge is that sometimes...
How long does it take?
It can sometimes take, years before people actually get formally diagnosed, because sometimes people say, oh, you're getting older, you're supposed to lose your memory, you're supposed to be forgetful, and we often chalk up these things. And they're also, and dementia itself, or memory problems, can be caused by a lot of other reversible things. Mm-hmm. Mood issues, for example, if you have anemia, if you have other things. That's why it's just important that if someone's having memory issues, to not just say that's a normal part of aging, to say maybe I should see my primary care provider, maybe we should start looking at things, because it's good to rule out the reversible things, but then if you have early diagnosis, at least you can get connected with groups like the Alzheimer's Society, and other organizations that can provide supports, and then you can look at treatment options. Because the other challenge with treatment options is, when we talked about there's so many different types of dementias out there, some of these medications being tried work well, or might work in some cases with certain types of dementia, but not for many others.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same with other diseases. They all have subsets, and now that we know more about genetics, different medications, sometimes they're thrown out because there's a trial that's too broad that actually works well for people. I just want to touch on one thing, and it seems to me that often when someone is diagnosed or is clear they have dementia and family members become caregivers, their friends kind of drop them.
When we talk about early diagnosis and the importance of it and getting people to the doctor, and I will say this research-wise, anecdotally, culturally diverse communities have a harder time doing that. There is a harder time. The research has shown culturally diverse communities get diagnosed later because of the stigma, because of the fear, because of the shame as well, knowing that someone in the family has dementia. When my father got diagnosed, a lot of our family and friends just stopped coming around. They didn't want to accept it, and they were upset that we were saying that it's Alzheimer's. Nope, you kids are wrong, he's just old, just leave him be. And thankfully we didn't listen, because if we had listened, we would have starved off getting treatment. But because I said, no, we're gonna push through it. And there was backlash. There was significant backlash from family and friends. They came around afterwards, but those moments can be very, very isolating for families, especially if coming from a cultural background where family, everyone takes care of family, you don't, go down that route. For care partners and the community, it can be an added stress.
Yeah, it's seen as a failure. Mm-hmm. You failed to live up to being the good daughter or the eldest son or a good spouse, when in fact you don't have the training or the skills to support your loved one. And so we see people with late-stage dementia in our programs where it's almost too late, whereby they do need 24-hour care. And so getting through that shame and normalizing this in terms of it is a disease, it is a condition, and it is not just part of aging is essential. I think when I think about mental health, it's just maybe about a decade ago, right? We experienced the same kind of stigma and discrimination. And I think now's the time to shine a light on dementia and, really help people understand that, it is something that happens to people.
I mean, there is all of that shame and stigma, but I'm wondering how much of that is just, a lot of people with any kind of illness is like, oh, what do I say to that person? What do I talk about with the caregiver? I mean, I bet a lot of it is just as simple as that, and it's so hurtful.
And I think it goes both ways, because caregivers that are overwhelmed, depressed, stressed, it becomes harder to engage with others because you start talking to your friends, to your family, they don't want to hear the same thing sometimes. And you feel bad, you don't want to impose your pain onto others. So, caregivers withdraw, and a lot of people, caregivers of people with dementia, develop depression. And it's not treated because it's considered, oh, well, wouldn't you be depressed if your partner has dementia? And yet they should be getting treatment themselves. And so when people are depressed, also they're less likely to engage with others. So it's the other people that are afraid sometimes or don't know how to help or what to say. But families sometimes kind of push away, not wanting to, really, but just kind of, it's too stressful.
Okay, when we come back, questions from our audience. Welcome back. It's now time to take questions from our audience, starting with Teresa. Hi, Teresa.
Hi. Okay, I'm Teresa Pierre, and my mother had dementia. And every time I forget something, I run scared because I think, am I getting dementia as well? Is it hereditary?
No, Teresa, it's a great question because I think a lot of people now are knowing that they have family members and loved ones who've been living with dementia. And so what I usually tell my patients is that often, younger onset forms of dementia are more likely to be hereditary, but because age is such a risk factor, we know that there's what we call normal age-related memory loss. But then as we get older, there's a growing risk that we might be living with dementia. So it's not inevitable, it's not necessarily hereditary, but it's always key that if you're getting concerns about your memory, speak to your primary care provider just to see could there be other things beyond dementia that might be causing that as well.
Next question is from Larissa.
Hi, thank you very much. I sense the desperation with everybody, and I think all of us have probably been touched with dementia, either knowing somebody or a family member or something. So I guess we can't be blamed if we try to look outside of conventional medicine for answers. I was wondering if there's any legitimacy to the claims made on TV for those online and on TV for supplements that claim to either invigorate the brain or help with memory?
So it's a great question, Larissa. I think everyone's hoping for that cure, that silver bullet. And so, as a physician, I always look at what is the best evidence out there and how has it been tested and what do we understand. And certainly there are some folks, for example, who might have deficiencies of certain vitamins, for example, vitamin B12, or they might be anemic and they have other issues, where sometimes we will treat those issues with supplements and they'll help improve their memory. But in terms of, have I seen any studies that have done with rigorous science that say taking, turmeric or doing this will actually cure someone or prevent someone from dementia? Not that great evidence, out there. But, sometimes just simpler things like whatever form of exercise you like to do, making sure your blood pressure is under control, staying social, not smoking. It's the motherhood and apple pie things that are likely to be more effective than an expensive supplement.
When we come back, final thoughts from our panelists. That's next. Welcome back to theZoomer. It's now time for final thoughts from our panelists, starting to my left.
I think the key thing that I want people to leave with is that dementia is not inevitable. There's many things we can do to prevent dementia. So learn about what those risk factors are to better manage that. And if you're worried about your memory or thinking or that of a loved one, talk to your primary care provider, see what they can do.
I think the other piece is, like we've talked about, is this idea of living with dementia. Until we have a cure, we have to learn to live with dementia. And that's more for the families than for the people living with dementia sometimes, because they don't have insight. So take care of yourselves. For those that are family providing care, it's a long journey, and look after yourselves as well.
I'd like to say, from a caregiving perspective, much to that point, really focusing on your own needs. It is a long journey, and the more that you invest in the journey, you have to invest in yourself. Tap into the local Alzheimer's societies, Baycrest, Yihong. There are many services and programs to support people, so please avail yourselves of those resources.
Yeah, I'd like to say help is here. If you don't know or if you're worried, just reach out and we'll have a conversation. There are so many different resources that are available, no matter what you're wondering about or what you need, and we can help you find those resources and connect you to them, because oftentimes it's just really difficult for people to know even where to start. So we're here to help, and just please call.
As a caregiver, I can say that dementia is a mental health, and as a mental health, we need to have compassion, we have to have empathy, and we have to accept it.
Zoey?
I don't know. I don't have any answers, but it's nice to see that everybody else is concerned with this and working so hard.
If we've learned anything today, it's that there's a wide diversity among dementia patients, and they still have some capacity to interact with others after their diagnoses. So let's make sure to keep contact with them and the people who care for them as they grapple with these difficult circumstances. To get in touch, send us an email at comments@thezoomer.com. Thank you to my panel and to you at home. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.